Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on which time zone you're in, and welcome to today's webinar. So first of all, I'd like to say a big thank you. Thank you for taking the time today and listen to me talk for well, the bones of an hour. I hopefully won't take the full hour, but I hope that today is useful. And today I'd like to talk to you about really how financial organizations can reduce risk and more importantly as well, of course, costs with security compliance automation. So allow me to do a small little introduction of myself. My name is Michiel de Lepper, and I'm Runecast Global Enablement Manager. I've been with Runecast since last year, but I've been in the IT security industry for about 13 years now. And within Runecast, I take on many job roles. I work with the channel, I work with our internal people, but I also do webinars like these. So today we're going to be talking about the financial industry and compliance. So what am I going to talk you through? So we're going to start off a little bit setting the scene and talk about why compliance is important. We're going to talk a little bit about the complexities and challenges that financial organizations face. And then we're going to shift gears a little bit and look at the compliance maturity model. After we've done that, we're going to look at how we can get you to the top of that model. And lastly, how we as Runecast can really help you. As we go through the presentation today, let's make this as dynamic as possible. I know this is a webinar, we got quite a lot of people on, but if you have any questions, please do leverage the Q&A functionality in Zoom. And I have an extra screen open and I will see any questions coming in. And I also have my colleague on the line to moderate as well. So if there are any questions, please do feel free to ask them. And where appropriate, I will stop as well to answer those, or we'll take them up at the end because we do have a little bit of time reserved at the end as well to talk about some of the questions you may or may not have. So without any further ado, let's get this session started, shall we? So compliance, why is it really important? And we all know that we need compliance to do business. If you're a financial institution and you're handling payment card information, you need to be PCI DSS compliant, for instance. We all know that. But what really is the underlying reasoning of compliance? It's not just because you're a financial institution that you need to be PCI DSS compliant. There's an underlying reason for that. And the underlying reason for that is that compliance helps an organization to implement a set of checks and balances to really ensure that you're operating as safely as possible. So in essence, compliance really is driven by breaches. And I always think that a picture says more than 1,000 words. So what you see before you is a graph that comes from information is beautiful. And these are data breaches with 30K records or above over the last number of years up until September 2022. So this isn't even a full picture, but it really illustrates what kind of risks are out there. And this is the reason why we all need compliance, not just because we're a financial institution and someone says we need to be PCI DSS compliant. We need to be compliant because it helps us to avoid risk. And that's the underlying foundation of all of this. And everyone in my career, at least, always talks about that the number of breaches is growing year over year. And yes, that's very true, right? We've all seen this. Everyone knows this. And when we look at the data, this is confirmed. We also look at this from a 2022 perspective. It's still confirmed. It's still growing. However, there's a much more worrying trend that's currently happening as well. And that's the second graph you see on the right-hand side here. And that is that the number of records per breach is increasing as well. So not only do we have more breaches, they're also becoming more effective. So the bad guys, the threat actors, are being more successful in actually penetrating organizations, but they're also being more successful in exfiltrating more data out. And of course, this is a concern. And when we asked directly at customers, 78% of companies expect compliance requirements to increase year over year. But staying compliant has become much more challenging over the years. And this is partly due to an ever-increasing complexity, both from an evolving regulatory landscape, but also from a technology landscape. And this massively and exponentially increases the risk of being out of compliance. Whereas before you only had to worry about your on-prem stuff, now you need to think besides on-prem also about hybrid clouds, multi-cloud, containerization, all of those new technologies that help us to be more efficient as a business also increase the risk. It increases the security risk, but it also makes it much more challenging to actually remain compliant or even have a visibility of if you're compliant or not. So the complexities of a modern environment really play into this. So when we look at this, and I'm sure everyone on the call today will have seen this as well in your own environments. Your environments are getting more and more complex. More and more solutions are being added each year to cover yet another new technology that's being introduced. But what a lot of people often forget is that each time a new technology is introduced, it requires more training, it requires more time spent, and it gives you yet another set of reports that gets added to your workflow without actually creating a holistic view of the problems that you are facing. So even though you may be implementing solutions, you're not actually getting solutions. You're getting more problems because of this disparate environment that you're building. So it turns out all of these things turn out to be very time intensive. And we all know time is money. So it becomes very costly as well, which isn't a very efficient way of running your business. So there's an inherent challenge of having multiple environments in multiple locations, managed by multiple teams across potentially multiple time zones. And the fact remains that not knowing is the very first big hurdle to success. What you can't see, you cannot manage, and you cannot protect. So from a starting point, wherever you are in your compliance journey, you must always know any and all of the assets across all of your environments, irrespectively of where those assets are located, whether they're in a private or a public cloud, irrespectively of which technology is being used, the type of asset, but also, of course, the geographical location. You cannot manage, optimize, and protect what you cannot see. And this is the direct problem that possibly many of you are currently facing. So let's switch gears here a little bit and move away from the problem state to really talk about solutioning. And with that, we can really wrap up the complexities and we can start to look at how to address these challenges. And we're going to do that within the compliance maturity model. So the compliance maturity model is really an uplift model where most organizations start in this particular model. And how in specific industry verticals, such as insurance and banking, etc., it means that an organization may have to be at a certain level within this model. Yet the reality dictates that often this means that they're actually not there yet. So let's talk about these stages a little bit and elaborate. So we're starting off with the reactive state. And this is the very basic state of an organization commencing this journey throughout this maturity model. And within the reactive state, everything you do around your compliance and regulations is very ad hoc. You're operating in a siloed way where every single business unit does their own thing. So you're left with an extremely uncoordinated compliance effort, which isn't very effective. Inadvertently, you're always going to move to a preliminary stage there. And the preliminary stage is really what I would like to describe as the oh dear phase. And the oh dear phase is when there's a need established. And generally speaking, in my experience, that need is established by two potential things. Either you have an audit and you fail miserably, or you have a breach. But if one of those happen, that need to be compliant is really established. And then an organization tends to scramble to put in basic policies and basic controls in place. But yet again, it's still a very siloed and uncoordinated effort. But at least the business now realizes that there is a need to be compliant. And you learn over time. So then you move to the defined state. And this is really where we take the lessons learned from reactive and preliminary. And we're going to be establishing leadership here. And it's critically important that you're going to start to implement some overarching policies across the organization. And together with those policies, you're going to be starting to implement controls to really monitor and measure your compliance efforts that you've created. And at the end of this defined state, you generally tend to start to play with a little bit of very basic automation to make your life just a tiny little bit easier. So we're getting somewhere now, but we're not there yet. We then move into the integrated phase. The integrated phase for an organization really means that now your compliance efforts are really well funded and staffed throughout the organization. There are very clear cross-functional, organizational-wide policies and procedures established within the entire organization. And you have effective controls, and you can really measure compliance. And you're upgrading your automation workflows. You're putting in more automation, making that whole compliance workflow easier for you. And then lastly is the optimized state. And the optimized state is the gold standard that every single organization should really strive to be at. And this is where continuous compliance is established. And what this means is that you've created a security and compliance aware culture within your organization across all of the levels of your organization. You have very comprehensive processes and policies in place. And those processes and policies expand across geos. They expand across the tech stack and also across the entire functional stack within your organization. You have a very high degree of measurability and automation. And this leads you to being able to be continuously compliant and tackle any improvements proactively. Because what we really need to realize here is that the optimized state is the gold standard, not just because the auditor states so. If we think back to the opening of this webinar, we defined that the reason we need compliance is to have those minimum sets of controls and policies in place to be secure and to minimize risk. So being compliant when an auditor is over the floor, that's great, but that's a snapshot. That is measured for that day or that period of time where the auditor is. And you may be compliant then, that's great, but what happens 5 seconds after you pass a compliance audit? And this is known in the industry as compliance drift. And what you really want to do is you want to be able to monitor and measure compliance drift. And with continuous compliance, you have that capability. And you can measure your compliance drift and proactively take actions to minimize any potential drift, thus reducing risk. And this is really where organizations need to strive to be. So our goal is to get you from that reactive state to the optimized state as fast as possible. It's impossible to skip all of the levels. It's just not realistic. However, we can help you with this and make this as easy as possible. So one thing I always like to ask anyone when I talk about compliance is really, how mature are your compliance efforts across your organization? And be really critical here, right? Because I'm not just saying this because Runecast can help, but I'm saying this because this is something we all need to think about. And once you start thinking about this, the real question is, how do you actually know? How do you know this? How do you measure? How do you measure efficacy within your compliance? And that's the real question. So let's take that maturity model and really move to what are the things that are required to get to that optimized state as fast as possible. And really, let's look at the steps that you as an organization can take. So let's move a little bit back to the basics. So we initially mentioned how in complex environments, visibility is very important. Even more so, in my opinion, visibility must be the basis on which every other step is built upon. And this means not only establishing visibility across what's known, but also finding the unknown dark corners of your environment or your infrastructure. Because again, right, you can't protect what you cannot see. Not knowing always means that you're always going to be reactive. So policies need to be established inside the organization around things like cloud usage, personal assets, right? The PC that's sitting somewhere in the office running some sort of web server that no one really remembers anymore. So asset management and asset discovery need to be part of the process. So once you've achieved that visibility, you're going to start building on that. And now we need to start putting policies, procedures, and controls in place to tackle the very first aspects of our environment. And those are always vulnerabilities, because vulnerabilities and compliance go hand in hand. And for this, you need to scan your entire environment to discover where you're actually vulnerable and put processes and controls in place to achieve good coverage and efficacy. After that, we need to start to prioritize so we can get a timely remediation. And prioritize based on criticality and relevancy. So turning information into intelligence. I can give you a list of 100 vulnerabilities and say all of these exist within your environment. Go fix them. That doesn't help you, because where do you start? Do you start at the top of the list, at the bottom of the list? So without any contextual information and without the information of criticality and risk, you're never going to be on top of your vulnerabilities. You need to start with the most critical and the most risky vulnerabilities first, and then work your way down the list. And one of the key aspects of all of this is the need to have ownership assigned to both the discovery part of vulnerability management, but also the remediation part. And generally, these need to be set independently of each other. And once you have that, you need to put reporting and tracking in place, both for your vulnerability assessments and your remediation efforts across the organization, so that you're always on top of which vulnerabilities are existing within my environment and what am I doing to remediate these. Next step then is to incorporate the vulnerability assessments and moving those into the compliance assessments, because they do go hand in hand. And there are many different compliance and security standards out there that all have variations in their bodies of checks and required adherence. So an organization really needs to establish, firstly and foremost, what's regulatory, what's internal, i.e., in other words, which standards are a must to follow and which ones are nice to have. And you need to do this across any technology and any geo that's being served. Organizations need to prepare for audits, not when the auditor has announced the audit, but as part of the course. So you need to run continuous reporting, and you need to put controls in place to ensure that standards are being followed and any potential of non-compliance can be proactively remediated. So now that we have proper policies and procedures in place, and we know where our assets are, and we can deal with remediation if and when it's needed, we're still not as efficient as we should be in our compliance efforts. What we've created so far are reporting, assessment, and remediation policies. And yes, this drastically increases our level of compliance and drastically reduces our risk exposure. But we're not there yet. The last and final step to truly optimize is to make sure these processes are automated as to limit the human input required to keep our infrastructure secure and compliant. And we can use all of our policies and create automated rules for how the organization actually deals with new vulnerabilities. Things like alerting or a configuration that's out of compliance, for instance. So we can then use remediation by using automation tools, for instance. And when all of these steps are created and they're followed by the organization, you've essentially created a continuous compliance framework, which not only automates the discovery, the classification, the assessment, and the remediation parts, but you've also created controls that actually monitor and measure adherence, adoption, and potential risk with as few manual steps as possible. And once you reach this stage, you're essentially making the organization audit ready at all times. Because once again, looping back to what we discussed in the beginning, right? It's great that we're compliant when an auditor is there. But if you're audit ready at all times, it means that you have less exposure to risk, ultimately benefiting the entire organization from an efficiency, efficacy, and a cost perspective. So you may have noticed here that up until this point, I really haven't talked about us as Runecast. So in order to truly understand what we do, it was really important for me to go through all of the things that I've just talked about. But in short, Runecast's platform can help you with all of the aspects that I mentioned before. Because with Runecast, We enable you to do more with less. And we do this by giving you a single platform, both from a usability point of view and an architectural point of view. And it's a single platform that allows you to really manage compliance, vulnerability, and security across on-prem, hybrid cloud, and multi-cloud. And we enable you to deploy technologies like containerization and to do so effectively and safely, and allow you to manage your existing infrastructure now and throughout the future. Because Roomcast will assess any deployment across the entire environment and assess them against compliance standards, both regulatory and security standards, since they're equally important. And we report on this not with issues, but with findings. And with findings, what I mean with that is we allow you to prioritize by giving you context. We're looking at criticality. We're looking at KEVs, which stands for known exploited vulnerabilities, for instance. Because if we know something is being actively exploited in the wild, it's a good indicator that's something you need to fix first. So we track your compliance, and more importantly, again, your compliance drift, making you always audit ready, instead of only be ready when the auditor is in front of the door. And I'm sure all of you have experienced this, right? You get an announcement, the auditor will be here in 6 weeks' time. And it's 6 weeks of hell, 6 weeks of multiple departments scrambling to get everything ready, getting all of the reports, getting all of the correlations in between them, running overtime, and everyone is tired and grumpy. No one likes compliance, but allow us to take the hassle out of compliance and really leverage compliance for what it actually truly is meant to do. And we automate those compliance assessments, giving you continuous compliance instead of a series of snapshots, measuring that compliance drift and proactively alerting to that, giving you that ability to proactively nip any compliance drift in the bud, making sure that you're as risk adverse as possible within your environment. In terms of what we support all of the major compliance regulations and security standards out there. And this is just a showcase of some of the ones that we support. Obviously, things like CIS and GDPR, HIPAA, PCI DSS, but also the things like NIST and Cyber Essentials, for instance, BSI for the German market. And one of the things I really like to note here always is we don't just focus on the big ones. Last year, we introduced KVKK, which is essentially the Turkish version of GDPR. So not only do we support all of the big ones, we support the smaller ones as well. And we can be very agile in what we can support. If you have any that we don't support, let us know, and we'll make sure we do. So how can we actually bring value to your organization? Well, we do this in a number of ways. And really, if there's one slide in all of this that you need to remember, it's probably this one. We're giving you major time savings. We automate security and regulatory compliance auditing and remediation. It means there's less troubleshooting, there's more vulnerability prioritization, coming back to that proactiveness. And in turn, we reduce outages. So we discover and remediate hidden issues before they cause outages. We improve security. We give you vulnerability and security posture management, making sure that your deployments are as secure as possible, adhering to both security hardening guides, regulatory compliance guides, but also best practice guides. And of course, the continuous compliance part that I talked about, that is so key to what we do. We give you continuous security, compliance auditing and remediation. And we give you this in the historical reporting as well, allowing you as an organization to track how you're doing over time and allowing you to see deltas and streamlining your own infrastructure and your own deployments to make sure that compliance turns from something that's a bother and a hassle into something that actually helps you as an organization. And then lastly, when you combine all of these things together, we reduce costs. And who doesn't like that? We prevent security breaches, we prevent outages, we save you time, and you avoid audit penalties, all the while allowing you to be compliant continuously. What's there not to like? And one of the other things I'd like to mention here is our time to value. Literally, when you start to deploy us within half an hour, 30 minutes, you will get your first actionable intelligence. You will get the first value out of us within 30 minutes. So there's no costly deployment cycles that take months to get us up and running. It is literally 30 minutes. If you don't believe me, I challenge you, please download the trial on our website. And I guarantee the 30 minutes. But don't take my word for this, right? Look at our customers. So this is some of our selection of our customers. The likes of Merck, the Volksbank, Erste Bank, Principal. Right? We're out there. We're doing our job very, very successfully. And our customers absolutely love us. And a lot of these use cases are described on our website as well. So if you want to know more about this, go to our website, go to our customer cases or success cases, and read for yourself what our customers are saying about us. Right? 100% of security audits pass successfully. 75 to 90% time savings on vulnerability management and troubleshooting. Up to 100% service uptime. And we're increasing the operational efficiencies, but also the observability, which is so incredibly critical. So with this, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'd like to open it up for questions now. I always try to keep these sessions around 40, 45 minutes. And I always like to give you some time back, but I also want to have more than enough time for any questions. So with this, I really invite you to ask me questions now, and I'll do my best in answering them. If there's anything unclear, let me know. If you want to know more, let me know, and I'll make sure someone contacts you. So please do take the time to ask me a couple of questions. Thank you. Okay, so a couple of questions coming in. Perfect. Keep them coming, though. So one of the questions here is, can I talk a little bit more about the title, the financial organizations examples? So we specifically orientated this towards the financial organizations because the message here is very much around the compliance aspects of what we do. We don't just do compliance. We do ITOM as well. Obviously, we do security as well, containerization. But finance is a heavily regulated industry. So it's very important for the finance sector to really leverage compliance to its full extent, not just because as a financial organization, you need to be compliant, but because of the reasons that I said initially, right? That compliance exists due to breaches, and compliance exists to give you a set of checks and balances to really decrease the risk you run as an organization. But we also recognize that because it's such a heavily regulated industry, that comes with challenges, and the ever-evolving regulatory landscape and the technology landscape combined make this very challenging for the finance organizations. Mostly one of the reasons why I asked that question in the middle, right? How mature are your compliance efforts across your organization? And how do you know? That last part is really important, because whenever I talk to this, and I talk to customers or I talk to prospects around this, everyone can always talk to me about their compliance maturity. But when I ask them how they know, that's where it fails, because in reality, they don't have efficient ways of measuring and controlling compliance. It's still very much a siloed and ununiform approach to compliance, making it very difficult. So from a financial point of view, compliance is critically important, but also extremely challenging. And we all know that regulatory compliance and security compliance is ever evolving and ever changing. So staying on top is very challenging if you don't have a solution like Runecast in place. So this is really why we orientated this towards the financial organizations. Obviously, this is applicable to every regulated industry, right? We could do the same thing for healthcare. But in this particular case, we wanted to focus on the financial organizations. So I hope that clarifies it a little bit. And another question here is how, if I can elaborate on how transparency happens across hybrid environments. So Runecast started out as a VMware specific organization. Now, we might still be known for this, but we've massively outgrown this. We've gone beyond this. So not only do we check any workloads that are on VMware, we also give you the transparency and controls across the hybrid cloud or the multi-cloud. A lot of organizations, I think it's about 80% of organizations, are actively moving to the cloud. And the last 20% are actively considering it. So the cloud is here to stay. But the cloud isn't the be-all and end-all of technology. And don't forget that this is a technology stack, right? You have your on-prem, you have your hybrid cloud, your multi-cloud, your containerization. All of these things are often very much portrayed as a linear journey, and it's not. It's a technology stack for a reason. These things are stacked on top of each other, massively increasing your complexity. So not only do we hook into the VMware on-premise environments, we also hook into your AWS, your GCP, or what I should now call GC, because it's Google Cloud instead of Google Cloud Platform. And we hook into Azure, giving you visibility across all of those workflows as well. And that's one of the big challenges, that your workloads are so disparate and spread out across all of these different technologies. It's very hard to get that visibility in there and that transparency. And by the way, we also hook into containerization, which, to be fair, containerization in my mind generally tends to go hand in hand with clouds, because a lot of the containerization workloads are run in the cloud as an infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. But you need to have a visibility across all of these things, all of these technologies from a singular platform. So not only do we hook into VMware, we hook into the multi-cloud environment as well, giving you that transparency that you need from a single source of truth. So I hope that answered that question. So those are the two questions I got. If there's more, please, everyone, do let me know. More than happy to talk about this. Okay, so I'm not getting any more questions in anymore. So with that, I'd like to say a really big thank you. Thank you for taking the time today with me and listening to me. I hope this was informative for you. And if you take anything from this, I hope you start to consider your own organization's compliance maturity levels and how you get that visibility as an organization. And if you struggle to get that visibility, do talk to us, because I'm 100% sure we as Roomcast can help you. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And if there's anything we can do, please do reach out to you. Thank you and have a good day.